This will hopefully be a pretty quick introduction to a minimal quasi-reproducible example that I have cooked up inside of the text mining vignette for harvesting some data off of Twitter. And this will not be a deep dive like the series of videos I did on text mining with PDF files from Supreme Court opinions, and I don't have much in the way of title slides or anything like that because I think that I have documented everything pretty well inside of this .rmd file, and it should be pretty self-explanatory and it should be pretty short. The first thing I'll show you is where to get this. We're in the GitHub repository, and if you look for RHD vignette text mining from my GitHub page, you'll find this project, and inside of this repository you'll find Twitter scraping example.rmd, and this has just some really quick code to leverage the rtweet package for harvesting some data from Twitter. And so let's toggle back over here to the RStudio console and we'll get started. As is my normal custom, I'm going to start this exercise by knitting the document here and showing you the output so that we can kind of work backwards. We can get that visual for what the code is going to do, and then we can go through the code very briefly. This is a really simple example that uses Twitter's public API to make a request, and the request that I've put in here is for tweets mentioning the @Noaa Fisheries Twitter account. And so I've used the public API to make a request for tweets mentioning @Noaa Fisheries, and then I've done a little bit of work on that data to extract the hashtags, and then I've aggregated the hashtags from those tweets and displayed them in a ggplot object. So incredibly simple, but kind of a neat example of what you can do with Twitter's public API. And I'm sure if you guys use a little bit of your imaginations, you can imagine much cooler things that could be done with this pretty minimal skill set. The real workhorse of this example is the rtweet package, and the rtweet package is what is going to allow me to connect to Twitter and start querying from their public API. So one thing that I would definitely advise doing is that the rtweet package author has a collection of vignettes online, and they're all very good, but one in particular has a nice step-by-step walkthrough on how to get yourself set up on Twitter, because in order to access their public API, you're going to have to set up a developer account, and you're going to have to register an app with Twitter. And so this vignette here is going to walk you through how to do that. And in my case, I went over to Twitter's developer page, I registered an app, and when I did that, when you register an app, under keys and tokens, so if you're in apps, this is my app, the Manualtron, and if we look at the details of my app, there's a keys and tokens page, which will give you the API key and some authentication credentials that you're going to use to start accessing the API in R and pulling data. And this is not a trivial step, but it's also not an insurmountable step. I had to poke around at it and try a few different times, so you may have to put a little bit of effort into it, but probably within an hour tops, you'll get connected. I believe in you. The only real dependency that this exercise has is this authentication information that you'll get from Twitter when you register your application. So where we were a second ago, if we look on Twitter's developer site and you go to your app details, you'll be able to get an API key and some access tokens. And that's really all you need in order to run the code that's in this particular exercise. I've imposed kind of a second step here where I've created a CSV file to hold this information, and that's not the most sophisticated way to protect your private API keys in some code that you plan to distribute, but in this case it works. So you'll notice that in the data directory for this project, I have a CSV file, and in that CSV file I've put my authentication information, my API key, my access token, and my access secrets, and I have not included this CSV file in the GitHub repository, so you will not have access to this. So if you'd like to do it exactly the way that I did it here, just go ahead and create a CSV file and then add your authentication information from your Twitter app. And if we go to this first chunk here, this is just the code chunk that's going to set up the connection to Twitter's public API. So there's a method createToken, and createToken accepts the arguments. It wants your API key and your API secret and your access token and your access secret, and it's going to get that from the CSV file that I have in the data directory, and it's going to use that information to authenticate me and establish a connection to Twitter so that I can query the public API. And there's a really simple method for getting tweets, and it's search_tweets from the rtweet package. And using search_tweets, you can pass it a search term. In this case, I've passed it as an example, I've passed it the @Noaa Twitter account, and I've just asked for 10 results. I've asked it to exclude retweets, and we'll see that this actually brings in quite a lot of information. This is a data frame with 90 fields, so there is an astounding amount of information that comes through this API. The fields that I've been using that I find kind of the most interesting are you get the screen name, you get the text of the tweet, and you get some things like the hashtags that were listed in the tweet. And so there's a really simple example with the Noaa account. And if we come down here, I have the Noaa Fisheries example. So if we execute this chunk here, I've changed the search term to @Noaa Fisheries. So this is going to look for tweets that have mentioned the @Noaa Fisheries account. And also I'm filtering out the retweets. And I'm also filtering out some of the columns because there are 90 columns. And for this particular application here, I'm just going to take the creation date of the tweet, the screen name of the account that tweeted it, and the hashtag that is associated, the hashtags that they attached to it, because I'm going to get the most popular hashtags. So in this case, I'm not even extracting the text of the tweet. I'm just extracting the hashtags. Rather than doing this whole chunk, let's go in here. Let's do this piece by piece so you can see this unnest method. And so if we do this, let's do head ht and take a look. We have a data frame here with the creation date, the screen name, and the hashtags, which are stored in a list, which is kind of strange. Normally when we work with data frames, we're used to working with columns that are singular valued. Not always, but I'd say that at least in this workshop, it's kind of been the norm to see data frames holding singular values. And in this case, the hashtag is a list because people can attach more than one hashtag to a tweet. And so what I'm doing here is using the unnest method. Let's do this here real quick, unnest. So we can see that unnest comes from the nest, and unnest come from the tidyr package. Okay, and they're going to allow us to unnest those hashtags. So now if I do head ht, I get the hashtags in a character vector. And what I'm going to do here is group by the hashtags. And we get a nice filtered data frame here with the count of each of the hashtags. And for this small data frame that we have, let's see, let's look at what is the this object up here, Noaa fish, only has 77 rows. So because Twitter's public API will not extract data that goes further back than 7 or 8 days, something like that. So it's the data that you can extract is you don't get a lot of archived data from Twitter's public API. So something like at Noaa Fisheries that maybe is not mentioned very frequently. If you're just getting 7 days worth of tweets, you may not get a lot. All right, I was pretty hand-wavy a second ago about this unnest method here. So let's take one more look at this real quick before we do this plot, just to be a little bit clearer about kind of what's happening. So this HT data frame, I'm going to go ahead and print the whole thing because it's only got seven rows, HT, and just have a look. So this is how the this is how the hashtags are stored. Okay, they're comma separated hashtags. So in this particular tweet here, they had hashtag right whales, hashtag entanglements, and hashtag lobsters. So so these have been nested in a list object. This column again is this column here, hashtags, is a list. And when we unnest that list, so let's just go ahead and take a look at one of these rows, right? Okay, so row 12, this was a tweet that was created August 24th, 2020, about 2030. And when we unnest that, it's going to turn each of these hashtags into its own row. So it's just going to expand the data frame a little bit. So hashtags, if we look at the environment here, hashtags now has 110 observations as opposed to the 77 rows we had in the data frame before. And if we look at it, it's not that big. We can look at the whole thing. And again, we'll see that what it did when it unnested these hashtags is it took this particular tweet here. This is one tweet from one account that had 3 hashtags, and it just expanded the number of rows for that tweet. Okay, and so that's what we did there. And then we filtered down to the top 20. Okay, and then we made our ggplot object as a bar graph. And these are the most popular hashtags in tweets mentioning at Noaa Fisheries.